Hi, Christy. Thanks for passing it over. So I have the privilege today to introduce Effy Vayena. So Effy is going to talk to us about ethics in AI. She's currently the chair of bioethics at the Swiss Institute of Technology in Zurich, so the ETH Zurich. She's an elected member of the Swiss Academy of Medical Sciences and is a specialist in the area of digital health ethics, health data governance, personalized medicine ethics, research ethics, ethics of genomics, data governance, and digital bioethics. So there's a lot of things in there. And she's currently working a lot on the normative aspects of independent oversight, particularly in the way of digital health technologies. So please welcome Effy to come and talk to us about ethics in AI.
Thank you. Okay, that works. Great, thank you. I think I'm just I need this. That's for my slides. And that works from here? Perfect. Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much, Liz, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I think my talk follows actually nicely from the last slide of the previous one, and I'm going to give a slide variation on the topic you saw on the previous screen, which is AI ethics. But I want to talk about gaps and opportunities that we have. And I'm sure all of you here have heard of AI ethics or of ethics in particular. But I just want you to put two caveats before I go on. I am going to use some terms interchangeably, although for those of you who are careful with definitions, these things mean slightly different things to all of us. But we tend to talk about AI ethics, about digital ethics, about trustworthy AI, about responsible AI, about AI for good, meaning more or less kind of the same thing, like a technology that's probably doing the thing we want to do correctly and not something else. And I'm going to use an example from healthcare and medicine. And then again, my other caveat is that I'll use interchangeably digital health innovation, medical AI innovation, and health AI innovation. Again, those terms are slightly different, but in the interest of this more broad talk, I'll do it interchangeably. So I will go through a few things that you see here with my example from healthcare in terms of how we're dealing with this question of ethics and AI. Very briefly, just to put everybody on this room on the same page, ethics is different from law. Ethics is not the same as a feeling. It's not the same as a religion. It's not the same as a culturally accepted norm, and it's not science. I think we probably agree on that, but I'd like just to set the scene. The most important thing I want to differentiate, and I'll tell you why, is that ethics is not law. They have a very tight relationship, a very strong relationship, but they're definitely not the same thing. And the reason I think it's good to remind all of us of that is particularly because in the AI space now in Europe, we are talking a lot about AI regulation. So we might have some conflation between what is AI ethics and what is the regulation of AI. I also want to say that using that difference to say that for those of you that have been remotely monitoring or watching this space, we've gone through a short history where we're thinking about ethics and calling them again different things. So many of you might remember the computer ethics, the information ethics, the digital ethics, the data ethics, the robot ethics, the cyber ethics, and as of lately, the AI ethics. And if you want to, again, see what is that we're actually meaning with all of this, I think what we're trying to say through all of these different definitions and a lot of scholarship actually, and a lot of work and a lot of groups working on things, is that we have this branch of and almost a discipline where we try to understand what kind of problems we're seeing when we're dealing with data, with algorithms, with robots, with their applications, with AI, and then what kind of corresponding practices we kind of evolve and develop in order to address them. When it comes to AI ethics, the people and the scholars, at least in my area, have been working on this for quite some time. Why did we get to that? If you saw in the previous presentation, it was quite all of it was about how exciting this field is and how much opportunity we had, right? Great examples of the videos we saw, of the chatbots telling us things. There was less talk about some of the problems. They were all kind of like all in the last slide. But a lot of people have been worried about the potential risks we run with artificial intelligence and with the whole digital kind of space. And these are just very basic, like errors and wrong things, wrong outcomes that can cause harm, bias, decisions about automation, all of the way down to, all these technologies replacing people and having impact on labor. Lots of complex issues that we cover under this AI ethics. So how would we do this rightly in order to avoid the kind of like the things that are not as pretty as the things we saw in the presentation? So a lot of people have been thinking about AI ethics. We do not have the absolute conclusion, but we certainly have a lot of work being done. And a lot of different ways in which we can think about AI ethics, like human rights, like ethical principles, like designs. So if you want to, dig in this area, you'll find tons of things. You'll also find something really exciting, in some ways exciting. You'll find that a lot of organizations were able to produce guidelines and ethical principles. So in some of the work we did, we identified back in 2019, 84 documents, official formal documents with principles about how to do ethical AI. A little later, other organizations, the Algorithmic Watch, found 173. So you can see a lot of people are interested in figuring out how to do AI in an ethical way. And we have a lot. We have a lot in theory. So we have a lot of principles that we agree on that it's the right way to go. For example, fairness, transparency, protection of privacy. All of these things are things we agree upon. But what's happened at some point is we realized, okay, it's great to agree on principle. And, we sit around and we agree on good things to happen. But people started feeling that we have to move a little bit away from that theoretical approach to something much more concrete, to something more practical. And some people went even all the way to say that, all this talk about AI ethics, it's actually useless. And if you're a scholar, you can do this kind of stuff and you can publish this kind of stuff in our disciplines. I think in your disciplines, less likely, but we can say things like that. And the reason we can say things like that is because although we have this agreement in principle, what is really happening on the ground? Do we get the ethical innovation that we're all desperate for? It no matter the domain of application. So the reason that we started thinking that, okay, we need to go from that super theory that we all agree on to the very practical translation of how it should look like on the ground is also because it's kind of convenient to agree on principle and not have something in practice. Partly because when you have a lot of different principles, you can just go around, find the ones we like, have then fitting them in what you are doing and say, look, I'm working with that principle. And accountability is getting lost. And at the very end, what's getting lost is at the end, what we want, the ethical innovation. So I'm going to use an example that I know better from medicine and healthcare, where we also did some work to understand why, if we have all these wonderful principles and all this agreement, actually, that these principles are the right ones that we should use, why are we struggling to get to the ethical innovation that we all are looking for? And parallel with that description, I'm going to say that at least in medicine, and those of you working in the space, you'll be familiar with that, there's a very urgent need to get that ethical framing right. First, because medicine stands to benefit enormously from AI, not only in the examples that you saw earlier, but really in medical device and development of medical device, pharmaceuticals, and a lot of other things. But medicine is also an area that is very strictly regulated, and we have a tradition of looking into ethics. And so here, the challenge is quite wicked. Now, again, when we're thinking about medicine, what happened is the same that we've been seeing with AI in general. Some organizations went out and said, okay, we'll tell you what the principles are. We'll tell you what's the right thing, what is the theoretical right thing to do. These are 3 documents that have come out the last 1.5 to 2 years from the World Health Organization, try to guide those who work with AI in health and healthcare, and most lately, those who work with large multimodal models in health and healthcare, to tell them, what would be the right attitude. And again, I'm highlighting those documents. They come from an international organization with a certain weight in this space, to show that we do have the theoretical approach ready. These are the principles that they used, and then again, you can read them for yourselves. They're not something special. We've seen them before. These are the 6 ones that we think are most related to this kind of space. Now, the question, though, is back to my original point. If we do have the principles, if we have these documents, if we have this theory, why are we not comfortable saying that the digital health innovation that we have is actually irresponsible? And again, I'm back to my interchangeable use of terms. And what it seems to be happening is that we have this gap. We have the gap from the theory to practice, which we tried in some of the work we did to evaluate and study. Why do we get there? Why are we stuck in translation from the theoretical principles in ethics to actual practice? And you could say, well, that's not unique to AI. That's not unique to medicine. Maybe we do have a translational problem across the board when it comes to ethical principles or ethics. But we'd like to kind of become a little bit more evidence-based into whys, in the hope that if we identify why we have this translational challenge, maybe we can do things that can help us get to the right thing. So these are data that we have, or studies we did in Switzerland. I don't think that if we were doing them in other countries in Europe, we'll find something dramatically different. And I don't think that our findings are only relevant for the health and medicine space. So they come from that space, but I'm presenting them a little bit with the feeling that they're more broadly applicable. So the problem that we have to achieving this ethical innovation seems to be, at least from our findings, that is based on these 3 rubrics of issues. The first is what we called, in a model that I can describe how we got there, ineffective stakeholder collaboration. The second is lack of ethical awareness among the innovators in the digital health space. And the third, which might surprise some, lack of relevant regulation. Often people say we're so much regulation, we don't need more. But I think I'll explain what I mean by that. So what is that ineffective stakeholder collaboration that seem to be such an obstacle? One of those is when we were looking at the digital health space and AI-enabled digital health technology, it seemed that we have a lack of standards and definitions which weaken the collaboration of stakeholders. Assume that the stakeholders won't collaborate. We also saw that we have less incentives, or actually non-aligned incentives, to pursue digital health innovation. And also, we had large issues with how data will be shared. On the right side of the slides, you can see actually quotes from actual people with whom we worked in using some particular methodology to glean some sort of conclusion in terms of obstacles. So one of issues is about ineffective stakeholder collaboration. And I want to give you an example in terms of standards and definitions. This is a study that we haven't done, but it was aiming to look at, and they called the study a trustworthy AI reality check. Remember, a lot of people want to have trustworthy AI. Don't ask me what that means. I think it's very complex. But let's say we all understand somehow what trustworthy AI is. In this case, they assumed that if for a trustworthy AI, what we need to see in the products that we're looking at is transparency about those products. So you can, go take a look at the study. But what they seemed to find was that they have major transparency gaps, which included missing documentation on training data, ethical considerations, limitations of deployment, consent, safety monitoring, GDPR compliance, the whole list, public documentation. So they concluded that public documentation of authorized medical AI products in Europe lacks sufficient public transparency to inform about safety and risks. And you can see the details here. According to this paper, to be trustworthy and as an AI, you got to submit to make all these kinds of information available to the public. Now, that's interesting if you think about it, that typically this is the kind of information we make available to a regulator in order to authorize the entry to the market. Are we sure that we want to move from that model to the model of making this available to everybody? Not because it's a bad thing to make it available. My worry is more that we're shifting the focus of I, as a patient, might have to go and check all those things to understand if the AI that is used in X hospital is trustworthy. And I'm very concerned about that kind of direction. So within even the whole discourse about what is trustworthy AI, how are we going to get it, you can see we think what I feel is confusion. The next rubric is about the lack of ethics awareness, which again we know about. Oops, sorry. Okay, there I am. I can't go back. But we've heard from many of our groups that those in doing innovation, again with including AI, are either not aware of ethical considerations, or they don't have the resources, if you're a small startup, for example, to address those ethical considerations. And that it's necessary to help those innovators and developers to do the right thing, again, in this pipeline of translation. And so, interestingly enough, what we're seeing in the meantime happening is that there is a proliferation now, not of ethical principles, we passed that stage, but a proliferation of tools that are meant to help people do ethical AI. And if you go to the OECD's dashboard, which is the OECD.ai, you can see that as of last check, which is 2 days ago, there were 728 tools in that repository that are meant to help you be ethical. Okay, when we looked at some of these tools, because these tools are not vetted, we saw a variety of things, that some unpublished work, but there were usability questions, there were barriers in organization, but the most important thing, there was absence of evaluation of these tools against a certain standard. They're there, they're supposed to help you, but they're not vetted. And so it's very interesting for us to see how we go in this translation pathway from very theoretical things to very practical things, but those practical things are still not vetted or tested against something. And last but not least, we were thinking about the AI, about the regulatory questions. I know we're having now more regulation in Europe, so we're quite worried about this, but things, for example, that can be obstacles in translating and getting to the right AI product in this space go not only to the regulatory as in laws and, let's say medical device regulation being layered by the AI Act, but also things like oversight. Our ethics review committees seem to have challenges even reviewing research, which includes artificial intelligence, and so how these standards are applied there and how the oversight ecosystem is going to work out, it's still quite unclear. Now, in our work, we try to think what could be done if these are the problems, if the collaboration is the problem, if the awareness is the problem, and if the regulatory confusion is the problem, what could we do about it? And we have some suggestions about what we can do, including things such as best practices of bringing together early on the stakeholders. This is something we argued also in a recent paper we published in trying to be quite positive about using AI in the medical space. But again, looking at how we can bring stakeholders together early on in the development process and not thinking about it lately, partly in order to establish a common language, and partly in order to be inclusive here in terms of what we understand as ethical AI. We also clearly thought that if we were to address this problem in the translation, we cannot shy away of the business models. And I know a lot of people in my area in particular are not keen on talking about business models, but it seems that these could be drivers, incentives, and business models should be ways that have to come into the conversation about the translation of principles to practice. And finally, of course, and that doesn't really affect you directly, but in the broader ecosystem, we need to make sure that we're looking at regulatory mechanisms that are more agile than we have seen so far. And we argued that the sandboxes that allow people to play together in order to establish what would be the ethical product and how feasible it is to do it, that is a way in which it could possibly work out. Now, all of that to say that a lot of in this institution, what we have called the institutional turn, going again from the very theoretical work to try to translate it into something very practical, not a straightforward path, but that leaves organization and institutions with a lot of things to do, whether they're going to be partners and collecting stakeholders to discuss, whether they're responsible to raise awareness within their organizations about what is ethical, what tools can be used. I think it creates something, a model, perhaps also relevant to your company, that will have to bring together the translation in this context, in the sort of definition of the value system that is relevant, in the training to address the awareness questions that I mentioned earlier, and in the process, which again is a combination of the other two. I close by saying that to do AI ethics, I think, in any sector, medicine and healthcare is the one I like more, but I don't think we have a magic wand that suddenly, either by with a principle or with a tool is going to happen. This is a much more complex process. We do feel the institutional turn in terms of the different responsibilities that institutions are going to have, but it will require a much more collaborative spirit in order to get there. And it will require exercise and practice. We have to try out some of those things, but we should move away perhaps from this original point of just using very liberally the terminology about responsible technology, responsible AI, and all of that without walking through some of those steps. And I think my time is up. Thank you very much.